Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin, check. You already know. Let's go. Welcome to Golden Blue today, everybody. This is a college football channel. So if you like college football, hit the like and subscribe button. It's that simple. Also, send gear to represent your team and be a part of my background forever. All you have to do is send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Looks like for a change, the job of the playoff committee should be fairly easy this week. It's fairly cut and dry as to who the top 4 teams are. I mean, this week really eliminated some teams and really separated some teams as far as teams that are nope, not going to make the playoffs officially, and the 4 teams that if the season were to end right now, they would be in the playoffs. This was a great weekend for football. There were several upsets. Of course, my team, West Virginia, finally got the monkey off their back, and they beat Oklahoma. I know. Bad Oklahoma in Morgantown, raining. Bunch of crap football being played, but still, a win's a win. And it felt very good. So this was a very interesting weekend of college football. So let's see how the playoff picture is looking right now. Well, the top 4 teams going into this week. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Michigan. And number 4, TCU. All 4 of these teams won. So they are still clearly the top 4 teams. I expect whenever the playoff rankings come out on Tuesday that the top 4 will remain the same. Of course, we'll start at the top. Number 1, Georgia. They went on the road to Mississippi State. They didn't have a great first half. They were barely in the lead at halftime. I believe the halftime score was 17-16 or 17-13, something like that. But anyways, in the second half, they had a much, much better second half. They ended up blowing out Mississippi State 45-19. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that this was the toughest game remaining on the regular season for Georgia. And they passed it with flying colors. Georgia is 10-0. Mississippi State drops to 6-4. They're still a solid team. They will be going to a bowl, but they couldn't get the job done. Georgia remains undefeated, firmly the number 1 team in the nation. In fact, I would not be surprised if they got all first place votes, and they are the solid number 1 team in the nation. Moving on to number 2, Ohio State. They looked much, much better this week, and I knew they would. I knew they had a down game last week against Northwestern, but we all knew that Ohio State was better than what we saw. They remain undefeated, 10-0. They absolutely blast Indiana 56-14. Indiana was never in this game. Ohio State jumped on them from the beginning, and they never let off the gas. So Indiana falls to 3-7. They are eliminated from bowl contention. All right, number 3, Michigan. They also remain undefeated. They absolutely blast a miserable Nebraska team 34-3. Even though Nebraska fired Scott Frost, they're still not looking good at all. They dropped to 3-7. They are officially not eligible to make a bowl this year. They will miss a bowl once again. Bad times going on in Nebraska right now. And finally, the number 14, TCU, they go on the road, remain undefeated, and beat number 18, Texas, 17-10. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that not only Texas was going to beat TCU, but they were going to throttle TCU. I'm telling you, TCU's defense looked elite against Texas. And I've made several videos how I've complained about TCU defense and how they pass interfere the entire game. And for whatever reason, the refs stopped calling pass interference in the second half. Well, that was not the case in this game. They had a solid defensive effort. They stifled Quinn Ewers. Texas couldn't run the ball on TCU. And if it wasn't for a fumble, scoop, and score by Max Duggan, Texas wouldn't even been in this football game. It was 17-3 at that time. TCU was looking to score right there and stretch the lead 24-3. But of course, Max Duggan fumbles the ball. Texas scoops and scores. Made it interesting, but in the end, they just couldn't stop TCU. TCU got first downs to end the game, and they ran out the clock. This is an impressive win for TCU. I now believe that TCU is definitely a top 4 team in the nation. This win right here convinces me. I know they were undefeated before this win, but some of their wins were a little fishy. This was a good win. TCU deserves to be number 4. They are undefeated. And right now, if the season stopped, TCU would be in the playoffs. Now, we know they have 2 remaining games, so we'll see how the rest of the season goes. Speaking of the remaining games, for Georgia, they have at Kentucky, who just got beat by Vanderbilt, so Georgia shouldn't have any issues with Kentucky on the road. And then they get Georgia Tech. So I expect Georgia to finish the regular season undefeated and head into the SEC championship as the favorite undefeated team. Now for Ohio State, their remaining games at Maryland, then number 3 Michigan. High stakes, playoff implications for that last game. For number 3, Michigan, they have Illinois, but Illinois just got beat by Purdue at home. Illinois had the lead in the Big Ten West. Now Purdue has the lead in the Big Ten West. Nobody wants to win the Big Ten West. For a while, Wisconsin looked good. Then Minnesota took over. Then Illinois was looking good. And now Purdue has taken over as the favorite to win the Big Ten West. That's a crazy division over there. And then finally, the season finale at number 2, Ohio State. That game might eliminate somebody from the playoffs, but it will also solidify somebody as far as a playoff contender. And then finally, TCU, I just talked about them. Remaining games at Baylor, that could be tricky, but I think Texas is a better team than Baylor, so I thought this road trip was going to be tougher than the Baylor road trip. We'll see what happens, but then after that, Iowa State at home. I now expect TCU to finish the regular season undefeated. What about the other teams that were in the playoff picture before this week? Well, some of the teams, they're still in the playoff picture, but there's a few that have been eliminated. This was a bad weekend for the Pac-12, by the way. But first, let's take a look at the number 5 team, Tennessee. They did have a few issues with Missouri, but they had a great second half. They end up blowing out Missouri 66-24. Missouri drops to 4-6. They have 2 games remaining to get bowl eligible. Tennessee is now 9-1. Their remaining schedule at South Carolina, at Vanderbilt. Both of those 2 teams don't look very good. Tennessee should finish the regular season with 1 loss, but we'll see if South Carolina and Vanderbilt can trip them up and completely knock them out of the playoff race. But if Georgia finishes undefeated, Tennessee will not make the SEC championship game. Now, we know that Michigan and Ohio State, they will play each other. So will the loser of that game have a better chance of getting in? Or will Tennessee have a better chance if they finish with 1 loss? I think the answer is Tennessee. What about LSU and Arkansas? LSU is hanging on by a thread as far as hopes of getting to the playoffs. And they are still hanging on by a thread because they go on the road and they barely beat Arkansas 13-10. LSU goes to 8-2. Arkansas goes to 5-5. Remaining schedule for LSU, UAB, and at Texas A&M. LSU should finish the regular season 10-2, get to the SEC championship, and then it's a win and you're in type of situation. But if LSU loses even 1 game, including the SEC championship, they are out. What about the other matchups in the SEC? Number 9, Alabama, basically eliminated from the playoffs. On the road to number 11, Ole Miss, who still had a shot. They just needed LSU to lose 1 more game. Well, that has gone out the window because Alabama went on the road. They beat Ole Miss 30-24. That was a great game. Ole Miss had a chance there at the end to tie it and then kick an extra point to win the game. But Jackson Dart couldn't connect, and Alabama holds on. Alabama is now 8-2. Ole Miss drops to 8-2. Both of these teams are basically eliminated from the playoffs. What about Clemson? They were dropped down to number 10. An impressive win over Louisville. Louisville was a good team. Clemson wins this game 31-16. Louisville drops to 6-4. Clemson is now 9-1. Remaining schedule for Clemson, Miami and Florida at home, and then South Carolina at home. They should finish the regular season 11-1 and then head on to the ACC championship game. The other ACC team remains with 1 loss as well. Number 15, North Carolina, goes on the road and actually beats Wake Forest. I thought Wake Forest was going to win this game. North Carolina wins 36-34. North Carolina now 9-1. Wake Forest now 6-4. Remaining schedule for North Carolina, they get Georgia Tech at home. Then the rivalry game against number 16 NC State. If they win both of those games, North Carolina's going to the ACC championship no matter what. But if they win both of those games, they will head into the ACC championship with 1 loss. So a 1-loss North Carolina could be playing a 1-loss Clemson. Could that be a play-in game for the playoffs? Well, because Ole Miss was knocked down, Alabama's basically out of it. LSU is still in this, but they have to win out. I think the ACC still has a shot. Even if it's North Carolina, that beats Clemson. Now, the ACC would rather Clemson beat North Carolina. That gives them a better shot. But even if it's North Carolina, I think North Carolina's going to rise in the rankings and be a top 10 team this week. Why? It's because of what happened in the Pac-12. It looks like the Pac-12 hopes of getting to the playoffs is now down to 1 team. Number 8, USC, does beat Colorado 55-17. USC is now 9-1. They were number 8. Colorado drops to a miserable 1-9. It is the other 2 teams that the Pac-12 is just shaking their heads and going, why, guys? Why? The first one, number 25, Washington at number 6, Oregon. The Huskies go on the road and they do upset Oregon. Washington jumps to 8-2. Oregon drops to 8-2. Oregon is now eliminated from the playoffs unless something crazy happens. The other team that was booted, number 12, UCLA. They get upset at home as well. Arizona gets the job done, 34-28. Arizona drops to 4-6. UCLA is now 8-2. they are basically eliminated from the playoffs. So it is up to USC. All the playoff hopes of the Pac-12 is now on the shoulders of USC. They must win out and win the Pac-12 championship if the Pac-12 wants to make the playoffs. But remember, USC still has to go on the road to UCLA. And even though UCLA just lost this game against Arizona, they're still a good team. And then USC has to beat Notre Dame at home and win the Pac-12 championship. That's a tough road. But if the Pac-12 wants to make the playoffs, it has to be USC. That's a shame. I was hoping that these teams could battle it out to the end and we'd have a one-loss Pac-12 champ, which still could happen with USC, but now the chances have gone down significantly. So we know that Ohio State and Michigan play each other. The loser could be eliminated from the playoffs, but I'm sure the playoff committee will compare resumes, and it wouldn't shock me if they kept the loser of that game in the playoffs when it's all said and done, depending on what happens with Tennessee, the ACC champion, and the Pac-12 champion. Y'all let me know in the comments section, who do you think wins between Michigan and Ohio State? Do you think the loser of that game will be eliminated from the playoffs? And who do you have making the playoffs this year? Teams 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.